So you grow up and you're going to tell me about your high school. Was that also obviously it was still overwhelmingly black? And
Right.
I'm just fascinated because you come from the South and yet you were a minority essentially in
Yeah.
your.
Okay. Well, what I love, Andrew, is I see these left wing people, and they talk about marginalized people, and I grew 95% of the people I grew up with were either poor blacks or had leprosy. You want to really tell me about marginalized people? I had more experience by the time I was 11 years old with marginalized people than most people are having a lifetime. And I just find some of this stuff when I hear this, it's almost amusing to me.
Why? Because it's some kind of abstraction they talk about, and they've never actually seen
You're
or
right.
understood a marginalized person. Well, they've never seen there are different ways to be marginalized.
Right. Somebody goes to the Dalton School and thinks they know something about marginalized people. I mean, you don't. I'm sorry. You go to, cathedrals in Northwest Washington or Sidwell. Are you going to tell me about marginalized people? Really?
But also, there's a sense that the marginalized people they talk about are completely cartoon characters, whereas among the strongest people I've ever met and the most resilient and the funniest come from these communities. They're not the eternal passive victims that some people who've never really encountered it will tell you about. I think of some of the old queens in the South, for example. Did they know how to party? Did they keep their dignity? They did.
Sure. I mean, look at the French Quarter. I mean, understand, I had a pretty, I was young. I'd sneak off and go to the French Quarter all the time. They had every kind of sexual minority that you could think of in the French Quarter. But there's a phrase that people use that has become fashionable, and it's one of my least favorite phrases, and that is the phrase "communities of color." That's so white to assume that everybody that is not white is the same. I mean, I think it's a massive insult when I hear that, because in Carville we had blacks, so they had a lot of people in the Philippines, Asians, Latin America. They're all different. This idea, this NPR idea that you're white, it's one thing, and you're not white, it's another thing, and it's idiotic, and no one uses it. I always give the example. I live in middle of New Orleans. Literally, 60% of the people I run into on the street are black. Except there were 3 black guys sitting there, and I said, "Hey, fellas, how are things in a community of color today?" They say, "What's this jive-ass motherfucker talking about?" Okay? I mean, so if you just think about the application of identity language to everyday life, it's really silly.